Imagine taking a pill from the person you love most in the world every single morning for 5 years. She hands it to you with a smile. She drives you to the doctor when you get sicker. She holds your hand while you slowly lose your mind, your strength, and your life. Now imagine finding out that the disease is not killing you. She is. And the only person who can stop her is your 16-year-old daughter. Ethan Mercer used to be the kind of man who could frame a 2-story house in a single weekend. At 44 years old, he was the founder and sole owner of Mercer Construction Group, a company he had built from nothing over 12 years into a business valued at just over $4 million. He had poured concrete in January blizzards, hung drywall until midnight to meet deadlines, and once rebuilt an entire client's roof in 3 days after a hurricane because he had promised it would be done before their daughter's birthday party. But on this particular Tuesday morning in late October, he could barely lift himself out of bed. His arms felt like they were filled with wet concrete, and his thoughts moved through his skull like cold syrup. Caroline, his wife of 20 years, appeared in the doorway holding a glass of water and 2 small white pills. "Time for your medication, sweetheart," she said, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. Ethan reached out with a trembling hand, took the pills, and swallowed them without looking. He had been doing this every morning for 7 years, ever since Dr. Ramirez had diagnosed him with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune disease that was slowly destroying his thyroid gland. The levothyroxine was supposed to replace the hormones his body could no longer produce. It was supposed to make him better. But Ethan had only gotten worse. The decline had been so gradual at first that he barely noticed it happening, the way you do not notice the tide going out until you look up and the waterline is 100 yards from where it used to be. In the first 2 years after his diagnosis, the medication seemed to work reasonably well. He still went to job sites, still swung a hammer when his crew needed an extra hand, still coached Lily's soccer team on Saturday mornings. He was tired more often, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but Dr. Ramirez assured him that was normal for Hashimoto's, that the synthetic hormone needed time to fully regulate his system. Ethan accepted this because he trusted his doctor, and because he trusted the small white pills that Caroline placed in his palm every morning with the same devoted smile. He had no reason not to trust them. But 5 years ago, something had shifted. The fatigue became crushing, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could resolve. He gained 43 pounds in a single year, despite eating less than he ever had before. His hair began falling out in clumps that clogged the shower drain, and he started wearing a baseball cap on job sites to hide the thinning patches. His thoughts, once sharp enough to calculate load-bearing specifications in his head while standing on a scaffold in the wind, became foggy and unreliable. He forgot client names, mixed up supply orders, and once drove to a job site 20 miles in the wrong direction before realizing his mistake. His foreman, a loyal man named Pete Jarvis who had been with him since the company's first year, quietly took over the scheduling and client communications without being asked. Dr. Ramirez kept increasing his levothyroxine dosage, running blood panels every 3 months, frowning at the TSH levels that stubbornly refused to normalize. Hashimoto's can be unpredictable, the doctor had told Caroline during their last appointment, shaking his head at the lab results on his screen. Some patients develop resistance to synthetic hormones over time. We may need to explore combination therapy. Caroline had nodded sympathetically, squeezing Ethan's hand, asking thoughtful questions about side effects and dosage timing. She always came to every appointment. She always took notes on her phone. She always picked up the refills from the pharmacy on her way home. She was, by all appearances, the perfect wife nursing her husband through a cruel and mysterious illness. Their daughter Lily had turned 16 in May, and she was everything Ethan wished he could still be: sharp, energetic, relentless. She had inherited his dark eyes and her mother's auburn hair, but her mind was entirely her own, a precise and probing instrument that dismantled problems the way a watchmaker dismantles a clock, gear by gear, spring by spring. She was currently the top student in Mr. Kowalski's AP chemistry class at Ridgewood High, and she had a habit of analyzing everything she encountered, from the nutritional labels on cereal boxes to the chemical composition of her nail polish to the pH of the tap water in their kitchen. Mr. Kowalski had told Ethan at the last parent-teacher conference that Lily was the most naturally gifted chemistry student he had taught in 23 years. She doesn't just memorize formulas, he had said. She understands mechanisms. She wants to know why atoms behave the way they do, not just that they do. Ethan had smiled and thanked him, but inside he had felt a pang of sadness, because he could not fully follow the conversation, his brain too fogged to keep up with the technical terms that would have been effortless for him 3 years earlier. Lately, Lily had been analyzing something else entirely: her father. She watched him shuffle from the bedroom to the kitchen each morning, his slippers dragging on the hardwood floor that he himself had installed 11 years ago. She watched how his hands shook when he tried to butter his toast, how he spilled coffee at least twice a week because his grip would suddenly give out, how he fell asleep in his recliner by 7 in the evening with the television still playing to an empty room. She remembered a different father, a man who used to carry her on his shoulders at county fairs, who built her a treehouse with a retractable rope ladder and a working doorbell, who could lift a 4x8 sheet of plywood like it was made of cardboard. That man had started disappearing 5 years ago, and the man sitting in the recliner now was a diminished copy, a faded photocopy of the original. Lily loved him fiercely and completely, and she could not understand why the medication was not bringing him back. She had read everything she could find about Hashimoto's thyroiditis online, and while the disease could certainly be debilitating, the medical literature consistently stated that proper levothyroxine therapy should manage the symptoms effectively in the vast majority of patients. Her father was not in the vast majority. Something was wrong, and Lily could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm arrives. It was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October when everything changed. Lily came home from school early because Mr. Kowalski had canceled the last period for a faculty meeting, something about the school board's new standardized testing requirements. The house was quiet in the way that only empty houses are quiet, a stillness that felt almost pressurized. Her father was at his monthly appointment with Dr. Ramirez, and her mother's car was gone, probably at the grocery store or the dry cleaner or one of the dozen errands that filled Caroline's afternoons. Lily went upstairs to change out of her school clothes and passed her parents' bathroom. The door was open, and she noticed her father's prescription bottle sitting on the counter next to the sink, slightly off-center from where it usually sat inside the medicine cabinet. Caroline must have taken it out that morning and forgotten to put it back. Lily had seen that orange pharmacy bottle 1,000 times before, her father's name printed on the label in block letters. But today, for the first time in 7 years, something made her pick it up. She told herself later that it was instinct, or curiosity, or maybe the AP chemistry part of her brain that could not leave a substance unexamined. She opened the cap and shook a single pill into her palm. The pill was small, round, and white, exactly what she would have expected from a generic levothyroxine tablet. But when she turned it over in her fingers, she noticed a faint imprint on one side, a combination of letters and numbers pressed into the surface during manufacturing. She had never thought to examine this code before, had never had a reason to. But Mr. Kowalski had taught her just last month about pharmaceutical identification systems, how every legitimate medication in the United States carries a unique imprint code that identifies the drug, the dosage, and the manufacturer. Lily pulled out her phone and opened a pill identifier website that the school nurse had mentioned during a health assembly. She typed in the shape, round. The color, white. The imprint code, carefully, character by character. She tapped search and waited for the result to load. The page that appeared on her screen contained a photograph of an identical pill, with a name beneath it that made her stomach drop 3 inches inside her body. The name was not levothyroxine. The name was propylthiouracil. Lily stared at her phone for what felt like a very long time. She knew what propylthiouracil was. She knew it because 3 months earlier, for her AP Biology elective research paper on endocrine system disorders, She had spent 2 weeks studying thyroid pharmacology in exhaustive detail. Propylthiouracil, commonly called PTU, was an anti-thyroid drug prescribed to patients with hyperthyroidism, a condition in which the thyroid gland produces too much hormone. PTU worked by blocking the enzyme thyroid peroxidase, which is essential for the synthesis of thyroid hormones T3 and T4. It was an effective and important medication for people whose thyroid was overactive. But her father did not have an overactive thyroid. Her father had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. His thyroid was underactive, progressively failing, producing less and less hormone with each passing year. Giving PTU to someone with Hashimoto's would be like cutting the brake lines on a car that was already rolling downhill. It would suppress what little thyroid function remained, sending TSH levels through the roof and plunging the patient into progressively severe hypothyroidism. Every symptom her father had been experiencing for the past 5 years, the catastrophic weight gain, the crushing fatigue, the cognitive fog, the muscle weakness, the hair loss, the depression, all of it was consistent with someone whose thyroid was being actively sabotaged from the inside. Lily's hands were shaking as she put the pill back in the bottle and screwed the cap on with deliberate care. She took 3 photographs with her phone, one of the bottle's label showing her father's name, the prescribing pharmacy, and the drug name, levothyroxine 150 micrograms, one of the pills inside the bottle, and one of the pill identifier result on her screen showing propylthiouracil 50 milligrams. Then she placed the bottle exactly where she had found it on the counter, angling it the same way, and went to her room. She sat on her bed and tried to think clearly, but her mind kept circling back to the same impossible question like a dog chasing its own tail. Her mother filled that prescription. Her mother handed those pills to her father every morning, smiling, saying, "Time for your medication, sweetheart." Her mother was the one who drove him to every doctor's appointment, who spoke to Dr. Ramirez about dosage adjustments, who picked up the refills from Greenfield Wellness Pharmacy on Route 9 every month. If the pills in that bottle were not levothyroxine, then either the pharmacy had made a catastrophic 5-year-long dispensing error, which was essentially impossible given the different imprint codes, or her mother knew exactly what was in those pills. Lily wanted desperately to believe it was a mistake. She needed to be absolutely certain before she allowed herself to think what she was already thinking. She needed independent confirmation. The next morning, Lily woke up at 5:30, 20 minutes before her mother's alarm. She crept into the bathroom in the gray pre-dawn light, opened her father's prescription bottle, and removed a single pill, replacing it with an aspirin tablet of roughly the same size and shape that she had taken from the bottle in the downstairs bathroom. She sealed the pill in a small plastic Ziploc bag and tucked it into the inner pocket of her backpack. At school, she went through her morning classes in a daze, answering questions mechanically, taking notes she would not remember writing. During her free period, she drove her mother's old Honda Civic, the one she was allowed to use for school commutes since getting her license that September after completing driver's ed over the summer, to Parker's independent pharmacy on Elm Street, 12 miles from Greenfield Wellness, where her mother filled the prescriptions. She chose Parker's specifically because it had no connection to her mother, her father, or anyone in their family. She walked in, approached the counter, and placed the pill in front of the pharmacist, a gray-haired woman named Dorothy, whose reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Can you tell me what this is?" Lily asked, keeping her voice even and polite. "I want to make sure my dad is getting the right medication." Dorothy put on her reading glasses, picked up the pill with a pair of plastic tweezers, and examined it under a magnifying lamp that was bolted to the counter. She turned it over, studied the imprint code, and typed something into her computer. Then she looked up at Lily with a puzzled expression that contained the first faint traces of concern. "This is propylthiouracil, 50 milligrams. Generic PTU, manufactured by Par Pharmaceutical. It's an anti-thyroid medication used for hyperthyroidism." She paused. "You said this came from your father's prescription? What is he being treated for? Lily said, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Hypothyroidism. His prescription is for levothyroxine. Dorothy's expression changed. The puzzlement was replaced by something sharper, almost alarmed. She explained carefully that PTU and levothyroxine were essentially opposite medications, pharmacological mirror images. One suppressed the thyroid, the other supplemented it. Giving PTU to a hypothyroid patient would dramatically worsen their condition. She strongly recommended that Lily's father contact his prescribing physician immediately and bring the medication bottle with him. Lily thanked her, declined Dorothy's offer to make the call herself, and walked back to her car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She sat behind the steering wheel in the parking lot for 11 minutes, staring at a crack in the windshield, before she trusted herself to drive. Her mother was poisoning her father. Not with arsenic or cyanide or anything that would show up in a standard toxicology panel, but with the precise pharmaceutical opposite of what he needed, administered in a bottle that bore his name and his doctor's prescription number. It was elegant, it was invisible, and it had been happening for 5 years, hidden in plain sight inside a routine that looked like love. Lily drove home in a state of terrifying clarity, her mind racing through the medical implications with the analytical precision that Mr. Kowalski had spent 2 years cultivating. She understood now why her father's condition had worsened despite increasing doses of what he believed was levothyroxine. Her mother was not replacing all of the levothyroxine, Lily realized. If she had, Ethan would have collapsed into myxedema coma within months, not years, and any competent endocrinologist would have hospitalized him. Instead, Caroline was doing something far more calculated. She was swapping roughly 2/3 of the pills with PTU and leaving the remaining third as real levothyroxine. This way, Ethan received just enough thyroid hormone to stay alive and functional, but the PTU actively suppressed what little his damaged gland could still produce, creating a slow, steady, believable decline. Every time Dr. Ramirez raised the dose, her mother adjusted the ratio, always keeping Ethan in that narrow band between suspicious collapse and stable health. The blood work would show elevated TSH and low T4, exactly what you would expect from worsening Hashimoto's, and no endocrinologist would think to run a drug screen for propylthiouracil because there was no medical reason for a hypothyroid patient to have it in their system. The disease was the disguise, and the medication was the weapon. But Lily needed to understand why before she could decide what to do. She could not simply call the police and say that her mother was giving her father the wrong pills. She needed to know who else was involved, what the motive was, and how deep this conspiracy went. Because a woman who had been systematically poisoning her husband for 5 years was not acting on impulse. This was planned, sustained, and carefully managed. Lily parked the car in the driveway, walked inside, and smiled at her mother, who was chopping vegetables for dinner. "How was school, sweetie?" Caroline asked without looking up from the cutting board. "Great," Lily said, setting her backpack on the counter and stealing a slice of bell pepper. "We started a new unit in chemistry. Really interesting stuff about pharmaceutical compounds." Caroline smiled. "That's wonderful, honey. Go wash up, dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Lily went upstairs, locked her bedroom door, and began building a case against her own mother with the same methodical determination that her father had once used to build houses. She opened a new document on her laptop and titled it Evidence Log. Then she started writing down everything she knew and everything she needed to find out. Over the next 2 weeks, Lily conducted her investigation with a patience and discipline that would have impressed a veteran detective. She started with the pharmacy. Greenfield Wellness Pharmacy was a small independent operation in a strip mall on Route 9, sandwiched between a nail salon and a Subway restaurant. Its website listed a single pharmacist as both owner and operator, Derek Holloway, RPH. Lily searched for Derek on social media during study hall, using the school's Wi-Fi and a private browsing window. Derek was 41 years old, divorced 3 years ago, no children. His Facebook was mostly private, limited to a profile picture showing a man with sandy hair and a forced smile, and a cover photo of a fishing boat. But his Instagram was not private. Lily scrolled through hundreds of photos documenting a life of determined mediocrity. Craft beer tastings, sunsets from a kayak, gym selfies, meals at mid-range restaurants. She was about to give up when she found what she was looking for, posted 18 months ago. It was a photo taken at a restaurant called Luca's Trattoria, showing Derek seated at a candlelit table across from a woman whose face was turned slightly away from the camera. The woman was wearing a green silk blouse that Lily recognized immediately because she had helped her mother pick it out at Nordstrom 2 Christmases ago. It was Caroline. Lily screenshot the photo, noted the date, the location tag, and the timestamp, and kept scrolling with the grim determination of someone who knows they are going to find more and does not want to. She found 3 more photos where her mother appeared in the background or at the edge of the frame. A beach sunset where Caroline's distinctive silver bracelet was visible on a wrist at the bottom of the image. A restaurant booth where the back of her auburn head was unmistakable. And a selfie of Derek in a parking lot where Caroline's Honda Civic was reflected in the window behind him. They had been careful, posting no photos together, tagging no shared locations. But they had not been careful enough for a 16-year-old girl with a personal vendetta, a forensic eye for detail, and an unlimited data plan. Lily saved every image, every timestamp, every location tag. The affair explained the mechanism, how Caroline had access to a willing pharmacist who could provide the substitute pills. But it did not yet explain the motive. People had affairs all the time without poisoning their spouses. Something else was driving this, something financial, and Lily intended to find it. She began searching the house during the hours when her mother was out, which happened to be every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, from roughly 1 to 4:30, a schedule that Lily now strongly suspected corresponded to visits to Derek's apartment above the pharmacy. Lily knew the house intimately, every closet, every drawer, every creaking floorboard. She started with her mother's home office, a small converted guest room at the end of the upstairs hallway. The desk had 3 drawers. The top 2 contained office supplies and old tax returns. The bottom drawer was locked. Lily picked the lock with a straightened paperclip and a tutorial she had watched on YouTube at 2 in the morning, practicing on her own bedroom door lock until she could do it in under 15 seconds. Inside the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of magazines that served as camouflage, she found a manila folder that was neither labeled nor concealed with any particular sophistication. Caroline apparently did not expect anyone to look. When Lily opened the folder and read the first document, she felt the temperature of her blood drop by several degrees. The first document was a durable power of attorney, executed 3 years ago and notarized by a public notary in Hartford, granting Caroline Mercer full and irrevocable authority over Ethan Mercer's financial affairs, medical decisions, and business operations, citing his progressive cognitive impairment and diminished capacity for independent decision-making. Ethan had signed it. Lily recognized his signature, shaky and uneven, the handwriting of a man whose fine motor control had been systematically destroyed by the drug his wife was feeding him every morning. The second document was a life insurance policy issued by Patriot Life Assurance 2.5 years ago, insuring Ethan's life for $2 million with Caroline as the sole beneficiary and no contingent beneficiary listed. The third was a stack of bank statements from an account at a bank Lily had never heard of, showing monthly transfers of between $3,000 and $5,000 from the Mercer Construction Group business account to a personal account in Caroline's name. The transfers had been occurring for 36 months. Lily did the math in her head. At an average of $4,000 per month, that was $144,000 siphoned from her father's company while he was too cognitively impaired to review his own bank statements. Lily photographed every page of every document, put them back exactly as she had found them, replaced the stack of magazines in the same order, relocked the drawer, and went to her room. She sat at her desk and forced herself to eat the granola bar she had brought from the kitchen, because she knew that her body needed fuel, even though her stomach was rejecting the concept of food. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. The power of attorney gave Caroline legal control over everything Ethan owned, justified by a cognitive decline that she herself had engineered. The life insurance policy meant that when Ethan died, and based on what Lily had researched about the long-term effects of PTU on a severely hypothyroid patient, death was not a distant possibility, but an approaching certainty. Caroline would collect $2 million tax-free. Severe, untreated hypothyroidism progressed to myxedema coma, a medical emergency with a mortality rate between 25 and 60%, even with aggressive treatment. If her father continued taking PTU instead of levothyroxine, his organs would slowly shut down, his body temperature would drop, his heart rate would slow to dangerous levels, and eventually he would slip into a coma from which he might never wake. The death certificate would read, "Complications of Hashimoto's thyroiditis," and no medical examiner would order a drug screening for anti-thyroid medication because there would be no reason to suspect foul play. It was the perfect murder hiding inside a legitimate disease. But there was another player in this conspiracy that Lily had not anticipated. The following Tuesday, while her mother was out at what Lily now mentally referred to as the Derek appointment, she checked the call history on the landline phone in the kitchen. Her mother used the landline occasionally because cell reception in their neighborhood was notoriously unreliable, something about the hills and the dense tree coverage blocking signal towers. Most of the numbers in the call log were familiar: Dr. Ramirez's office, Ridgewood High's main line, the dentist, two of Caroline's friends from her book club. But one number appeared 17 times in the past month, always called during the afternoon hours when Ethan was napping in his recliner, knocked unconscious by the exhaustion that his body could never shake. Lily called the number from a prepaid phone she had purchased at CVS for $19 in cash, paying at the self-checkout to avoid being remembered. A woman answered on the third ring. "Hello?" The voice was unmistakable, a voice that carried the particular cadence of someone who had lived in South Florida for 20 years and had absorbed the unhurried drawl of permanent sunshine. It was Vivian Walsh, Caroline's mother. Lily hung up without speaking, her heart hammering against her ribs. 17 calls in a single month to a grandmother who lived in Boca Raton, Florida, and who supposedly only called on Christmas, Easter, and birthdays. Lily thought about the way Vivian had always looked at Ethan at family gatherings, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she congratulated him on a new contract or a business milestone. She remembered Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago, when Lily had gone upstairs to get a sweater and passed the guest room where Vivian was talking to Caroline behind a mostly closed door. "You could have done so much better, sweetheart," Vivian had said. "A construction worker? You were meant for more than this." Caroline had murmured something Lily could not hear, and Vivian had replied, "Well, it won't be forever. We'll figure something out." Lily had thought nothing of it at the time. She had been 12 years old and more interested in pumpkin pie than in her grandmother's opinion of her father. Now, 4 years later, those words sounded less like snobbery and more like the opening lines of a conspiracy. Lily spent 3 more days assembling the final pieces of the puzzle. She accessed her mother's personal email account through the family desktop computer in the living room, using a password she had guessed on her second attempt, Mittens2010, the name of Caroline's childhood cat, followed by the year of Lily's birth. The email inbox was unremarkable, filled with promotional newsletters, school notifications, and book club correspondence. But in a folder labeled Recipes that contained no recipes, Lily found a thread of 43 emails between Caroline and Vivian dating back 5 years and 2 months. The earliest email had been sent by Vivian, and its contents confirmed every suspicion that had been building in Lily's chest like a slow-rising flood. "Derek says the transition should be seamless," Vivian had written. "Same size pills, similar color. The imprint codes are different, but Ethan won't know to check. This is for the best, Caroline. You deserve a real life, not nursing some blue-collar nobody through a disease he probably brought on himself. Derek understands the pharmacology better than anyone. Trust the process. Trust your mother." Lily read the entire email chain from beginning to end, tears streaming silently down her face, and learned the full architecture of the plot that had been constructed around her father's dying body. The plan had been Vivian's idea from the start. She had met Derek Holloway at a charity auction in Boca Raton 6 years ago, where Derek had been a guest of one of Vivian's real estate clients. Through conversation, Vivian learned that Derek was a licensed pharmacist, recently divorced, burdened with $67,000 in gambling debts to an online sportsbook, and morally flexible enough to discuss hypothetical scenarios involving medication substitution without flinching. Vivian had introduced Derek to Caroline 4 months later, arranging a meeting at Luca's trattoria that she described in an email as just dinner between two people who can help each other. Within 2 months, Derek and Caroline had begun an affair. Within 4 months, Vivian had paid off $30,000 of Derek's gambling debts with a wire transfer from her retirement account, with the remaining $37,000 contingent on completion of the project. The emails documented everything in nauseating detail. The early messages revealed that the original goal had not been murder but financial control. Make Ethan cognitively impaired enough to justify a power of attorney, gain access to the business accounts, and bleed the company slowly. "We don't need him dead," Vivian had written in the first year. "We just need him dependent." The insurance policy and the escalation toward a fatal outcome came later, after 2.5 years, when Vivian calculated that the business income alone was not enough and pushed Caroline to take out the life insurance. Derek provided the dosage calculations, explaining precisely how to mix PTU with real levothyroxine pills to mimic natural Hashimoto's progression without triggering alarm in blood tests. He also explained why Caroline had to do the substitution at home. "I can't dispense PTU in levothyroxine bottles," he wrote. "Pharmacy audits reconcile inventory against dispensing records. If my PTU stock doesn't match my prescriptions, I'm done. I'll write off the PTU as expired stock and give it to you in bags. You swap them at home." The pill substitution schedule was timed to coincide with each prescription refill, and Derek created dummy patient profiles in his dispensing system, writing fictitious prescriptions for non-existent hyperthyroid patients to account for the PTU he was diverting from stock. Lily closed the email folder, cleared the browser history, and went to the bathroom, where she vomited into the toilet until there was nothing left. Then she washed her face, brushed her teeth, and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She was not going to call the police yet. She was not going to confront her mother. She was going to do 2 things. First, she was going to start protecting her father immediately by secretly supplementing his poison medication with real levothyroxine. And second, she was going to collect physical evidence so airtight that no defense attorney in the country could create reasonable doubt. For the first task, she drove to a pharmacy in the next town over and purchased over-the-counter thyroid support supplements containing selenium and zinc, which would provide at least some support to her father's battered thyroid gland without requiring a prescription. She crushed them into his morning orange juice, which she began making for him every day, telling Caroline she had seen a TikTok about fresh squeezed juice being good for autoimmune conditions. Caroline had smiled and said, "That's so thoughtful, Lily." Within a week, Ethan reported to Dr. Ramirez that he was feeling very slightly better, maybe 5%. It was not much, but it was the first improvement he had experienced in 5 years, and it told Lily that her father's thyroid gland had not been completely destroyed. There was still time, but she needed to move fast. For the second task, Lily invested $89 of her birthday money in a miniature wireless camera from Amazon, the size of a shirt button, with a battery life of 14 hours and motion-activated recording capability. She paid for it with a prepaid Visa gift card to avoid any digital trail leading to her personal accounts. She hid the camera inside a decorative artificial plant on the bathroom shelf, positioning the lens to face the medicine cabinet at an angle that captured the entire counter area. She placed a second camera, a small motion-activated unit she had borrowed from her friend Marcus, under the pretense of recording raccoons in her backyard for a biology project, in the hallway outside her parents' bedroom, aimed at the bathroom door. Then she waited, checking the footage each morning before school by removing the micro SD cards while her parents were eating breakfast downstairs. On the first 2 nights, the cameras captured nothing unusual. On the third night, at 11:47 in the evening according to the camera's timestamp, the bathroom camera recorded exactly what Lily had been expecting and dreading. The footage showed Caroline entering the bathroom alone, wearing a gray cotton bathrobe, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She moved with the unhurried confidence of someone performing a well-practiced routine. She opened the medicine cabinet, removed Ethan's prescription bottle, unscrewed the white cap, and carefully tilted the contents into her cupped left palm. From the right pocket of her bathrobe, she produced a small Ziploc bag containing white pills that looked identical to the ones she had just poured out. She sorted through the pills with the focused precision of a bank teller counting bills, separating roughly a third of the real levothyroxine tablets and setting them aside on the counter, then filling the rest of the bottle with PTU from the Ziploc bag before dropping the kept levothyroxine pills back on top, mixing them in. She swept the remaining real pills into the Ziploc bag and sealed it. She returned the bottle to its exact position in the cabinet, checked her reflection in the mirror for a single expressionless moment, turned off the bathroom light, and walked back to the bedroom where her husband was already asleep. The entire operation took 87 seconds. She had clearly done this dozens, perhaps hundreds, of times before. Lily watched the footage on her laptop at 2 in the morning with her bedroom door locked, her headphones on, and her hand pressed against her mouth to keep from making any sound that might carry through the walls. She watched the footage 3 times. On the third viewing, she noticed a detail she had missed before. When Caroline emptied the original pills into her palm, she held one up briefly under the bathroom light and turned it over, examining the imprint code the way Lily herself had done weeks earlier. She was checking that the PTU tablets looked right, that the imprint codes matched the batch Derek had provided, that nothing was visibly wrong with the substitution. This was not a woman acting out of confusion, desperation, or ignorance. This was methodical, deliberate, practiced pharmaceutical sabotage performed with the calm efficiency of a professional. Lily saved the footage to 2 separate USB drives, one of which she hid inside the hollow base of her desk lamp, and the other she placed in her school locker behind a stack of old textbooks. She also uploaded the footage to a private cloud storage account she had created using a disposable email address under the name Marie Curie. Because even under extreme stress, Lily had a sense of humor. Then she began planning her next move. The video evidence was powerful, but a defense attorney could potentially argue that Caroline was merely organizing her husband's medication, not substituting it. Lily needed one more piece of evidence: a recording of Caroline or Derek explicitly discussing the substitution in their own words, using language that left no room for alternative interpretation. The opportunity came the following Thursday. Caroline announced at breakfast that she was going to visit her friend Helen for the afternoon to help plan a fundraiser for the Ridgewood Library. Lily knew from the phone records, the email chain, and the predictable rhythm of her mother's deceptions that visiting Helen was code for meeting Derek at his apartment above the pharmacy. Lily told her mother she was staying late at school for a chemistry club meeting, then drove to the strip mall on Route 9 and parked behind the building where her car would not be visible from the street or from the pharmacy's front windows. Derek's apartment was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a metal exterior staircase on the building's north side. The windows were single-pane glass, at least 30 years old, with visible gaps in the caulking. Lily climbed halfway up the staircase, crouching below the window line, and pressed her phone's voice recorder against the wooden window frame of what she could now identify as the living room. She could hear voices inside, muffled by the glass but comprehensible through the gaps in the old caulking. Her mother was already there. Caroline's voice came first, tight with impatience. "He's getting worse faster now. which is what we wanted, but Dr. Ramirez is changing things. He wants to try a different brand of levothyroxine, something called tyrosint. It comes in a gel capsule, not a tablet. If Ethan actually starts taking real tyrosint, his levels will improve and Ramirez will know something was wrong with the previous medication. Derek's voice was calm, clinical, the voice of a man discussing inventory management rather than murder. That is a problem. I can't substitute PTU into a gel capsule without it being immediately obvious. The consistency, the color, everything would be wrong. We have two options. First, I can call Ramirez's office as Greenfield Wellness and tell them we don't carry tyrosint, recommend they keep him on generic levothyroxine tablets. That buys us a few months. Second, if Ramirez insists on tyrosint, I can compound a liquid PTU suspension and substitute it for the liquid form of levothyroxine. It's more work, but it's doable. Caroline, how long do we have? Realistically? Derek, at the current PTU dosage, maybe another 8 to 10 months before his organs start showing signs of failure. His liver enzymes were already elevated at his last blood panel, which Ramirez attributed to the Hashimoto's, but is actually a side effect of chronic PTU exposure. Lily's hand was trembling so badly that she pressed the phone harder against the window frame to keep it steady. Caroline's voice again. My mother called 3 times this week. She's getting anxious. She wants to know if we can speed things up. Derek paused before answering. We can. If I double the PTU concentration in the next batch, from 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams per pill, it would push his TSH into the 200s within 2 months. At that level, myxedema crisis becomes almost inevitable. 4 to 5 months instead of 8 to 10. Caroline, and the insurance? Derek, the 2-year contestability period expired 6 months ago. Patriot Life can no longer contest the claim or investigate the cause of death retroactively. As long as the death certificate says natural causes, the payout is automatic. There was a pause, and then Derek said something that Lily would remember for the rest of her life, spoken in a tone of casual professional pride. The beauty of this approach is that myxedema coma presents identically to end-stage Hashimoto's disease. No coroner in the country would order a toxicology screening for anti-thyroid medication in a patient with a 7-year documented history of progressive thyroid failure. It's the perfect exit strategy. Lily heard enough. She needed to leave before they did. She eased herself back down the metal staircase, one step at a time, gripping the cold railing with both hands, her phone clutched against her chest. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused to check the recording. 23 minutes and 14 seconds. Every word captured. She walked to her car as quickly as she could without running, because running would attract attention, and she could not afford attention. She pulled out of the parking lot, drove 4 blocks to the Ridgewood Public Library, parked in the furthest corner of the lot, turned off the engine, and cried. She cried for her father who took poison from a smiling hand every morning. She cried for herself, because she was 16 years old and carrying a secret that weighed more than any person should carry at any age. She cried for the version of her mother that she now understood had never existed. The woman who baked birthday cakes and braided Lily's hair and read bedtime stories. All of it a performance maintained alongside a 5-year plot to murder the man sleeping in the next room. When she was done crying, which took 20 minutes by the clock on the library's wall, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket and opened her laptop. She could not wait any longer. Derek had just proposed doubling the dosage. Every day of delay was a day closer to a concentration of PTU that could push her father past the point of recovery. She searched for the nearest FBI field office. She chose the FBI over the local police for a specific reason. She had seen Derek Holloway playing poker with 2 Ridgewood police officers at the annual Greenfield Firehouse fundraiser last summer. She did not know if those officers would protect Derek, but she could not take the risk. The FBI's Hartford field office was 43 miles away. Lily drove there directly from the library, arriving at 4:17 in the afternoon according to the clock in the building's lobby. She approached the reception desk, a thick pane of bulletproof glass with a speaker grill, and told the woman behind it that she needed to speak with an agent about an attempted murder conspiracy involving pharmaceutical fraud and insurance fraud. The receptionist looked at her with the specific expression that adults reserve for teenagers who say dramatic things in public buildings. But she picked up the phone and made a call. 17 minutes later, a door opened, and Lily was led down a beige corridor to a conference room where Special Agent Maria Torres was waiting. Torres was a woman in her late 30s with sharp dark eyes, a firm handshake, and no discernible capacity for small talk. She gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Tell me everything." And Lily did. The presentation Lily delivered over the next 90 minutes would later be described by Agent Torres in her official case report as the most organized and compelling witness briefing I have received in 16 years of federal service. Lily had brought a laptop bag containing every piece of evidence she had collected over the previous 3 weeks, organized in labeled folders, both physical and digital. She presented them in chronological order: the photographs of the pill bottle and the online identifier results, the confirmation from Dorothy at Parker's independent pharmacy, the screenshots of Derek's Instagram photos with Caroline, with dates and location tags highlighted, the photographed documents from Caroline's locked desk drawer, the power of attorney, the life insurance policy, the bank statements showing $147,000 in unauthorized transfers, the phone records showing 17 calls to Vivian Walsh, the email chain from the recipes folder documenting 5 years of conspiracy planning, the camera footage of Caroline swapping the pills at 11:47 in the evening, and finally, the 23-minute audio recording from Derek's apartment in which Caroline and Derek discussed accelerating Ethan's death and the insurance payout timeline. Lily also presented a typed, single-spaced, chronological summary of her entire investigation, with dates, times, locations, and source citations for every piece of evidence. Agent Torres listened without interrupting, filling 6 pages of a legal pad with notes. When Lily finished, Torres was quiet for what felt like a long time. She reviewed her notes, flipped back to the first page, read something, and then looked up. "We will need to verify all of this independently," she said. "We'll obtain our own search warrants, subpoena the pharmacy's dispensing records, and run an independent toxicological analysis on your father's current medication as well as his blood. The audio recording will need to be authenticated by our forensic audio lab. The emails and bank records will be subpoenaed directly from the providers. But I want you to understand something." She paused. "Based on the evidence you have presented to me today, I am opening a federal investigation into Caroline Mercer, Derek Holloway, and Vivian Walsh for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud, effective immediately. We will place your father under protective observation within 48 hours. She paused again and looked at Lily with an expression that might have been admiration, or might have been disbelief, or might have been both. "How old are you?" she asked. 16, Lily said. Torres shook her head slowly. 16 years old, and you just handed me a case with better evidence packaging than most prosecutors bring to a grand jury. The FBI moved with the controlled urgency of an organization that understood both the severity of the crime and the fragility of the evidence window. Within 72 hours, a federal judge in Hartford had issued search warrants for Greenfield Wellness Pharmacy, Derek Holloway's apartment, Derek's personal vehicle, and all electronic devices belonging to Derek, Caroline, and Vivian. The warrants were executed simultaneously at 6 in the morning on a Friday, a coordinated operation involving 12 agents from the Hartford and Miami field offices. At the pharmacy, a forensic pharmacist cataloged every medication on the premises and identified significant discrepancies between the dispensing records and the actual inventory of propylthiouracil, discrepancies consistent with large quantities of PTU being diverted from stock over a 5-year period. In Derek's apartment, agents found a lockbox under the bathroom sink containing 7 Ziploc bags of propylthiouracil tablets in various dosages, a digital scale accurate to the milligram, a pill counter, and a hardbound notebook with handwritten dosage calculations. The dates in the notebook corresponded exactly to Ethan Mercer's prescription refill schedule, as recorded in Dr. Ramirez's office. At the pharmacy, the forensic pharmacist discovered 12 fictitious patient profiles in Derek's dispensing system, all prescribed PTU for hyperthyroidism, none of whom existed at the addresses listed. Derek had used these phantom prescriptions to justify his PTU orders from the wholesaler and to write off the diverted stock as legitimately dispensed medication. On Derek's laptop, encrypted but recoverable by the FBI's digital forensics team, agents found the complete email correspondence with Vivian Walsh, including records of wire transfers totaling $67,000 from Vivian's retirement account to Derek's personal bank account over 5 years. The arrest of Caroline Mercer occurred at 7:45 on the same Friday morning. Lily had spent the previous night at the home of her Aunt Rachel, Ethan's younger sister, who lived 20 miles away in Glastonbury and who had been briefed by Agent Torres the night before. Rachel had held Lily while she cried and then made her eat a full dinner and sleep for 8 hours, because Rachel was the kind of person who believed that crisis management started with adequate nutrition and rest. At 7:45, 2 FBI agents in dark suits arrived at the Mercer home on Maple Drive, where Caroline was making scrambled eggs in the kitchen while Ethan sat in his recliner in the living room watching the morning news, wrapped in a blanket because he was always cold now. The agents presented their credentials and the arrest warrant. Caroline read the warrant slowly, set it down on the kitchen counter next to the eggs, and placed her hands behind her back without being asked. She did not cry. She did not protest her innocence. She did not ask to speak to Ethan or to Lily. She looked at the agents with an expression that Lily would later describe, when recounting the moment to a therapist, as annoyed, like they had interrupted her schedule. Ethan watched from his recliner, too confused and too physically weak to stand, and asked the agents what was happening. They told him that his wife was being arrested on federal charges and that someone would explain everything to him at the hospital. Derek Holloway was arrested at his pharmacy 30 minutes later. He was considerably less composed than Caroline. When agents entered the pharmacy through the front door, Derek attempted to run through the back, realized it was blocked by 2 additional agents, reversed course, and tried to flush his cell phone down the pharmacy's restroom toilet. The phone, a waterproof model, was recovered intact, which was fortunate for the prosecution and catastrophic for Derek, as it contained 3 years of text messages between him and Caroline that explicitly discussed every aspect of the poisoning scheme, including a message from Caroline dated 14 months earlier that read, "Mom says we need to be patient. Another year at most. Then we're free. Just keep the supply steady." Derek physically resisted the agents during handcuffing, which added an obstruction of justice charge to his growing list of felonies. Vivian Walsh was arrested at her waterfront condo in Boca Raton by agents from the FBI's Miami field office at 8:15 that morning, Florida time. She was wearing a silk dressing gown and holding a cup of green tea. She told the arresting agents that there had been a terrible misunderstanding, that she was a retired real estate professional and a grandmother, and a generous donor to the Boca Raton Community Foundation, and could she please call her attorney before they put those handcuffs on. Ethan was transported to Hartford Hospital by ambulance that same morning, accompanied by Agent Torres and Lily, who had driven from Glastonbury the moment Rachel's phone rang. His blood work, drawn within an hour of admission, told the full and devastating story of 5 years of pharmaceutical sabotage. His TSH level was 97 micro-international units per milliliter, nearly 20 times the upper limit of normal. His free T4 was 0.1 nanograms per deciliter, essentially unmeasurable, indicating almost complete absence of functional thyroid hormone. His liver enzymes were elevated to twice normal levels, a known side effect of chronic propylthiouracil exposure. And a targeted toxicology screening, specifically ordered by the FBI's consulting endocrinologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, detected significant levels of propylthiouracil and its metabolites in his blood serum, a drug that had never been prescribed to him by any physician in any medical record. Dr. Ramirez arrived at the hospital within the hour, summoned by Agent Torres. He reviewed the toxicology results, the pharmacy records, and his own 7 years of clinical notes, and his face cycled through shock, confusion, disbelief, and finally a quiet, simmering fury. "I kept increasing his levothyroxine because his levels never improved," Dr. Ramirez said, his voice tight. "I ran every diagnostic test I could think of. I consulted 2 specialists. I considered autoimmune flares, absorption disorders, even pituitary dysfunction. 2 years ago, I proposed hospitalizing him for supervised intravenous levothyroxine therapy to rule out malabsorption. But Caroline insisted it would be too disruptive to his mental health and asked to try oral dose adjustments first. I agreed because she seemed like the most devoted wife I had ever seen. The one test I never ran was a screening for anti-thyroid medication, because it never occurred to me, not once in 7 years, that someone would deliberately administer PTU to a hypothyroid patient. It is medically insane." The detoxification and recovery process began immediately, but with extreme caution, because abruptly restoring thyroid hormone to a severely depleted patient could trigger a fatal cardiac arrhythmia or acute adrenal crisis. Dr. Kim started Ethan on a carefully titrated intravenous levothyroxine protocol, increasing the dose by small increments every 48 hours while monitoring his cardiac rhythm, blood pressure, and cortisol levels around the clock. Ethan was hospitalized for 3 weeks. During that time, Lily visited every day after school, sitting in the chair beside his bed doing her homework while he slept, which was most of the time. When he was awake, they talked about small things, baseball scores, and what Lily was learning in chemistry, and whether the hospital cafeteria's mashed potatoes were actually made from potatoes. They did not talk about Caroline, not yet. The subject sat between them like a third person in the room, present and silent and enormous, and neither of them was ready to address it. One evening, during the 2nd week, Ethan was staring at the ceiling with an expression that Lily had learned to recognize as the look of a man replaying every morning of the last 5 years. "I took those pills from her hand," he said quietly, without looking at Lily. "Every single morning. 5 years. She smiled at me, and I smiled back, and I swallowed them." Lily reached over and took his hand and held it and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that could make that sentence less devastating. Some things can only be witnessed, not comforted. The trial of Caroline Mercer, Derek Holloway, and Vivian Walsh began on a gray Monday morning in March in the United States District Court for the District of Connecticut. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney James Whitfield, a meticulous man with a reputation for winning complicated conspiracy cases, charged all 3 defendants with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, namely propylthiouracil administered without knowledge or consent, insurance fraud, wire fraud related to the interstate bank transfers, pharmaceutical fraud, and elder abuse under Connecticut statute, which classified the deliberate medical exploitation of a cognitively impaired person, regardless of the victim's chronological age. The evidence presented over 7 days of testimony was overwhelming in both volume and specificity. The prosecution introduced the camera footage, the audio recording, the pharmacy dispensing records, the emails, the text messages, the bank transfer records, the toxicology results, the dosage notebook found in Derek's lockbox, and the testimony of 5 expert witnesses. A forensic pharmacist who explained the PTU substitution mechanism, an endocrinologist who described the progressive physiological damage, a forensic accountant who traced the money, a digital forensic specialist who authenticated the electronic evidence, and a forensic audio analyst who verified the apartment recording. Dorothy from Parker's Independent Pharmacy testified about identifying the PTU tablet. Mr. Kowalski testified about Lily's aptitude and character. Dr. Ramirez testified about the 7 years of inexplicable treatment resistance that now had a clear and horrifying explanation. Caroline's defense attorney attempted to construct a narrative of coercive control, arguing that Caroline had been manipulated by her domineering mother and her manipulative lover into participating in a scheme she did not fully understand. The attorney painted Caroline as a victim of Vivian's lifelong emotional abuse and Derek's predatory influence. But the evidence dismantled this narrative systematically. The emails showed that Caroline had actively managed the substitution schedule, adjusting PTU dosages in response to Dr. Ramirez's prescription changes and reporting back to Vivian with clinical precision. The bank statements showed that she had been siphoning money from Ethan's business for 36 months, demonstrating sustained independent criminal initiative. The insurance policy application, signed by Caroline with a forged medical questionnaire that understated Ethan's symptoms to secure a lower premium, demonstrated calculating premeditation. And the audio recording from Derek's apartment captured Caroline asking whether they could speed things up, a question that no victim of coercive control would pose to her alleged controller. Derek's attorney tried a different strategy, arguing that Derek had merely filled prescriptions as directed and was not responsible for how Caroline administered the medication. This argument lasted approximately 4 minutes before the prosecution played a text message in which Derek had written, "Increase the PTU to 75 milligrams per pill. Should accelerate the timeline by 2 to 3 months. He won't notice the difference." Vivian's attorney mounted perhaps the most audacious defense, claiming that Vivian, at 65, suffered from early-stage dementia and could not have understood the implications of her participation. A court-appointed neuropsychologist dismantled this claim in 20 minutes of testimony, noting that Vivian had scored in the 95th percentile on every cognitive assessment administered to her. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 42 minutes. They found all 3 defendants guilty on all counts. Caroline Mercer was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 25 years. The judge noted that the crime's duration, sophistication, and exploitation of a position of intimate trust warranted a sentence at the upper end of the guidelines. Derek Holloway received 28 years for conspiracy to commit murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, pharmaceutical fraud, and obstruction of justice. His pharmacist's license was permanently revoked, and the Connecticut Board of Pharmacy issued a lifetime ban that would follow him to any state in the country. Vivian Walsh, at 65 years old, received 20 years, a sentence that her attorney publicly characterized as effectively a life sentence for a woman of her age. The judge responded from the bench with words that would be quoted in legal journals for years afterward. "Mrs. Walsh, you conceived and orchestrated a plan to murder your own son-in-law through the deliberate and prolonged administration of a harmful drug. You recruited co-conspirators, financed the operation with $67,000 of your own money, and repeatedly pressured the participants to accelerate the timeline when your patience ran thin. You treated your granddaughter's father as an obstacle to be eliminated for financial gain. 20 years is not a life sentence. It is a measured response to an act of extraordinary cruelty." Ethan sat in the courtroom throughout the trial, in the front row behind the prosecution's table, stronger now than he had been in years, but still visibly diminished from the man he had once been. When the verdicts were read, he did not cheer or cry or react in any visible way. He simply closed his eyes, lowered his head, and breathed. Lily, sitting beside him with her hands clasped in her lap, reached over and took his hand the way he used to take hers when she was small and frightened of thunderstorms. After the sentencing, Ethan was invited to deliver a victim impact statement. He stood slowly, walked to the lectern, gripped its edges for support, and spoke in a voice that was quiet but unwavering. "For 5 years, I believed my body was betraying me. I believed I was dying of a disease I could not fight, and I accepted that, because accepting what you cannot change is what strong people do. I mourned the loss of my strength, my sharpness, my ability to be the father my daughter deserved. I watched myself disappear one piece at a time, and I thought it was nature, and I thought it was fate. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined in my worst nightmare, was that the person handing me my medication every morning with a glass of water and a smile was the one making me sicker. Caroline did not just poison my body. She poisoned 20 years of memories. She poisoned my understanding of what love looks like. She poisoned my ability to trust the people closest to me. He paused, his jaw tightening. I will recover physically. My doctors tell me my thyroid function is already improving. But I do not know if I will ever trust another human being the way I trusted her. He looked at Lily, and his expression changed, softened, opened. Except one, he said. I trust one person completely. And she is the reason I am standing here today. The recovery took time, more time than Ethan wanted, and less time than his doctors had predicted based on the severity of his thyroid suppression. 6 months after the trial, his TSH levels had dropped from 97 to 11, still above the normal range, but trending steadily and encouragingly downward. His weight had decreased by 22 pounds, and for the first time in 5 years, he could see the shape of his jaw in the bathroom mirror. His cognitive function, measured by a battery of neuropsychological tests administered by a specialist at Yale New Haven Hospital, had improved significantly in processing speed, verbal fluency, and working memory, though Dr. Ramirez cautioned that some neurological damage from the prolonged PTU exposure might be permanent, manifesting as occasional word-finding difficulties and a slightly reduced short-term memory capacity. Ethan attended therapy twice a week with a psychologist who specialized in intimate partner violence, sessions where he slowly dismantled the architecture of lies that had defined his marriage and began rebuilding something in its place. The hardest part, he told his therapist, was not the anger. The anger was straightforward and justified and had a clear target. The hardest part was the grief. He grieved for the 20 years he had spent with a person who had been planning his destruction for at least the last 6. He grieved for the strong and capable man who had existed before the decline. The man who believed that hard work and good faith and an honest handshake were enough to build a life. He grieved for Lily, who at 16 had been forced to become a forensic investigator because every adult in her world had either failed or betrayed her father. Lily graduated from Ridgewood High School as valedictorian the following spring. In her graduation speech, she did not mention the trial, or her mother, or the investigation, or the FBI. She talked about chemistry. She talked about how every substance in the universe, from the water in a glass to the hemoglobin in blood to the steel in a skyscraper, is made of the same handful of elements arranged in different combinations, and how the difference between a medicine and a poison is often nothing more than dosage and intent. She talked about paying attention, about developing the habit of looking closely at the things that everyone else takes for granted, because the truth is almost always hiding in the details that people are too busy or too comfortable to examine. She talked about the periodic table and how every element on it was forged in the heart of a dying star, and how that meant that every person in the audience was literally made of stardust, which sounded like a greeting card, but was actually a verifiable scientific fact. She did not say her father's name, but everyone in the audience knew who she was talking about. Ethan sat in the third row, 20 pounds lighter than his worst, his hair growing back in patches of silver that had not been there before, his hands steady enough now to applaud without trembling. When Lily stepped off the stage, he stood up and hugged her with a strength that he had not possessed for 5 years, lifting her slightly off the ground, and he whispered into her hair, "You saved my life." Lily whispered back, "You saved mine first, Dad. Every treehouse, every soccer game, every rope ladder. I'm just returning the favor." And then they stood there, in the gymnasium of Ridgewood High School, holding on to each other while 600 people applauded and pretended not to cry. They sold the house on Maple Drive that summer. Neither of them could sleep there anymore. Not in the rooms where Caroline had maintained her impeccable performance of devotion for 20 years. Not in the bathroom where she had swapped the pills at 11:47 each night with the mechanical precision of a factory worker. Ethan used the proceeds from the house sale combined with the sale of a 40% stake in Mercer Construction Group to his longtime foreman, Pete Jarvis, who had been running the company's daily operations for 3 years and deserved the ownership, to buy a smaller house in Westbrook, a quiet coastal town 40 miles south of Ridgewood. The new house was a modest 2-bedroom Cape Cod with a wraparound porch that faced Long Island Sound and a backyard garden where Lily planted herbs that she identified by their Latin names: Ocimum basilicum, Rosmarinus officinalis, Thymus vulgaris. Ethan returned to work part-time, overseeing projects from the office rather than climbing scaffolding, and found that his instinct for structural engineering was returning, slowly but unmistakably, like a radio signal clearing after years of static. He joined a support group for survivors of intimate partner poisoning, a phenomenon far more common than he had ever imagined, and discovered that sharing his story helped other survivors recognize the warning signs in their own relationships, signs that were easy to miss when they came disguised as love. Lily enrolled at Yale University that fall, 14 miles from her father's new house, majoring in forensic chemistry with a minor in criminal justice. She had received a full academic scholarship, bolstered by a recommendation letter from Special Agent Maria Torres that the admissions committee later described as one of the most compelling endorsements we have received in the history of this program. On weekends, Lily drove down to Westbrook, and she and Ethan developed a tradition of cooking dinner together, something they had never done during the years when Caroline controlled the kitchen. Ethan learned to make pasta from scratch, and Lily taught him the chemistry behind why salt raises water's boiling point by approximately 0.5 degrees Celsius per tablespoon, and why you should add acid to a tomato sauce at the end of cooking, rather than the beginning, to preserve the brightness of the flavor. They did not talk about Caroline often, but when they did, they talked honestly, without performative rage and without self-pity. "She made her choices," Ethan said one Sunday evening, stirring a pot of marinara sauce while Lily diced onions beside him. "And you made yours. The difference between the two of you is that her choices were about destroying someone, and your choices were about saving someone. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are and who she was." Lily smiled, wiped her eyes, which she blamed entirely on the onions, and set the table for two. 2 years after the trial, Ethan received a certified letter from Patriot Life Assurance. The insurance company, having been alerted to the fraud by the FBI during the criminal investigation, had conducted its own internal review and determined that Caroline had submitted materially false information on the policy application, including a forged medical questionnaire and falsified statements about Ethan's health history. The policy was voided retroactively, and Patriot Life enclosed a reimbursement check for all premiums paid, totaling $14,860. It was a small amount compared to the $2 million that Caroline had intended to collect upon his death, but it represented something much larger than money. It represented a system that had ultimately worked, not because it was designed to catch this particular crime, but because one 16-year-old girl had refused to look away from an inconvenient truth. That same week, Agent Torres called Ethan to tell him that the Mercer case had been incorporated into a new FBI training module on pharmaceutical-facilitated domestic violence, a category of crime that the Bureau was seeing with increasing frequency. "Your daughter's evidence collection methodology is now being taught to first-year agents at Quantico," Torres said. "I've been doing this work for 16 years, and she built a tighter, cleaner, more comprehensive case at 16 years old than most veteran investigators build in an entire career. You should be proud." Ethan thanked her and hung up, then walked out to his porch with a cup of coffee and sat watching the ocean for a long time, listening to the waves, thinking about the strange and terrible mathematics of loss and survival, and about how the most dangerous poisons are the ones that look exactly like medicine. Justice had been served, the guilty were punished, the innocent were healing, and they had made it through, together. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We will see you in the next one.